Now we'll move on to our final session, and before I introduce our esteemed guest, I want to thank the University of Missouri's Donald W. Reynolds Journalism Institute for sponsoring this session, and I'd like to welcome our members joining us via webcast and Cover It Live. Our keynote speaker this morning leads a company that not only changed how information is acquired and delivered, it blew the old paradigms to bits. It organized the great global brain of the internet and put the information at the fingertip of the masses. When your company goes from a noun to a verb, you know that you've had an impact. His remarkable journey began with an electrical engineering degree from Princeton, followed by a master's degree from the University of California at Berkeley, where prophetically he developed a campus computer network. He also earned his PhD in computer science from Berkeley and went on to a number of IT positions before landing at Sun Microsystems, becoming Chief Technology Officer, and then later CEO of Novell. In 2001, he was recruited to an oddly named but promising internet search company founded by two Stanford students. You could say he was a good hire. That internet startup today is the world's largest search engine and an information powerhouse. It's one of the defining cultural phenomena of our times. And you might think that such an internet visionary would see newspapers in his rearview mirror, but not so. He's a passionate believer in newspapers and their role in democracy. Please join me in welcoming the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Google, Eric Schmidt.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. That was very, very kind of you. I'm here because I want to talk about newspapers, information, and the American dream. Why is America so wonderful? Why am I here? Because of freedom of speech. Without freedom of speech, there can be no effective democracy. Without freedom of speech, there can be no, if you will, policing of the elites that dominate so many countries. America is a great idea precisely because it can change. Without freedom of speech, and without the newspapers that make us understand what's really going on, none of the great things that have happened in the last 200 years in America would have occurred. That's fundamentally why I'm here. When you think about the political environment that we've just been through, 6 months, 8 months, huge, huge set of political changes, leadership changes, and business changes, all brought about the fact that people got tired of one set of assumptions and we're now pursuing a different set of assumptions. And although we know that things are changing, we don't know how long it will take. We don't know the scope and depth of the recession that we're now in. But we do know that change comes in hard times, that it comes in recessions. It doesn't come in times of overall abundance. We know that this is when the issues that everybody faces come front and center. But the principles that I talked about, freedom of speech, the role of newspapers, the role of a reporter going and discovering the good and the bad and making everybody, bringing sunshine to everything, is one that will be with us for many, many hundreds of years, thousands of years, and is fundamental to the way I think human systems will work for the rest of eternity. This current economic situation allows us an opportunity to relearn what creates real value. There was a saying a year or two ago that in our system, financial innovation precedes financial regulation. Well, I think that one's gone for a while. I think all of a sudden now we've gotten back to how do you create wealth in a country? How do you create jobs? How do you create happiness? How do you make things better? And the answer is through business investment and in particular innovation. Innovation in all sorts of new ways. Innovation in businesses, innovation in serving customers, literally new inventions that change the world in ways that are very, very profound. From my perspective, the recovery that we will have and that we are very much all looking forward to will be very much technology driven. That the investment that is being made now in science, technology, environmental services, and so forth and so on, all the things that you all know about, will then create the high-paying, export-oriented jobs that will then help define how we go from here. So my basic thesis here is that innovation occurs and business success occurs and societal wealth is created, but only in the backdrop of the principles of free speech. Think about something we all share, which is a focus on transparency. Don't you think that if there had been better transparency in what was going on, a lot of the excesses that we've seen and that we're all upset about would have been addressed much earlier? Ask someone who is a victim of a huge banking bubble or a huge housing scandal if they'd known more earlier, or more importantly, if the thoughtful and knowledgeable people had informed them, they would have taken action earlier. It's the lack of transparency in our government and other governments that was one of the sort of the great problems that got us into this. Again, another example of the importance of free speech. So here we are, and we've got a situation where markets are repriced to historical norms. What's going to happen? If you take my bias and you take my bias about innovation, you can imagine, for example, that audiences, and I want to talk a lot about innovation, that audiences organize themselves into segments. There's the globe, a couple billion people. Well, you're going to reach them with advertising. If you're building a business with a couple million readers, well, maybe you should use the to-be-invented micropayment systems. It's obvious that you'll need those sorts of things. And if you're building a business which has a relatively smaller number, thousands of specialized readers, you'll use subscription services that are complex and powerful, and people will get great value for that. My point here is not that these models are wrong, but rather that they globalize, and that in this time, this is the time when investment in those models creates the next opportunity for all of us. So what happens with the newspaper industry from our perspective is first and foremost a redefinition of what the newspaper of record means. I think everybody here understands the notion of a newspaper of record. It's the one that records what's happening in your life. It's the local newspaper that records what's happening in your city or your town. It's the service, the place that you go for information that matters. It's a national stage and a global stage and a business stage. And we have to reinvent, relearn what the paper of record means in a world where so many different formats and so many different ways that things are being consumed. And fundamentally, the question is, what do you need to do to become the newspaper of record in this new form? And the answer, of course, is ultimately all about reporting, which is what newspapers really are about. It's the relationship that the reporter has with the local police chief and the courts and so forth, and knowing all the things that happen in the local environment, or the national environment, or the global environment that we've been talking about. And so you end up with a situation where you have two models of information, both of which are important. The paper of record, in its appropriate context, available everywhere, and then user-generated content, of which Wikipedia is a phenomenal example. Wikipedia, which has this enormous depth of information, but changes, and then you have the record of what happened. The two coexist, the two merge together, and that's a new model, a new platform, if you will, for how newspapers will evolve. So in that model, newspapers become platforms for technology to use their services, to build businesses on top of them, and also to interlink and hyperlink all of the different information sources that end users will take. Now, the innovation message is fundamental from our perspective and from my personal perspective, because I think it's where real change occurs and it's where real unmet needs are met in our society. And innovation is bizarre because it's very difficult to centrally plan. That innovation fundamentally occurs from, in Google's case, we have a notion of 20% time. In universities, it's 2 graduate students and a young assistant professor who then spin out and create a new company that changes this or changes that or so forth and so on. It's small companies that are founded that provide the economic innovation engine for all of us. You can't plan it, but you can architect a structure where innovation is welcome and where it's taken advantage of. And we're seeing this right now with something called cloud computing. All of us have grown up with the personal computer revolution, We're all familiar with personal computers and Macintoshes and so forth, and centralized computers and these sort of networks. But there's a new form of computing coming along, generally known as cloud computing, where virtually all of the hard work is being done in the servers, and you take the device, the computer, people here in the room and on our webcast have computers in front of them, and you just plug them in and you don't worry about them too much. They don't have a lot of memory in terms of they don't retain things. If you drop them, you don't have to worry about it because that information is always stored in what we call the cloud. Google and other companies provide these services. Why is this important? It's an inversion of architecture. Historically, the networks were unreliable and personal computers were reliable. In this new model, the network is always there, always reliable, and so the hardware can become less reliable, more disposable. You don't have to worry about it. It means all of a sudden you can pick up a phone, a netbook as they're called, a PC or what have you, and everything works, and you can get your work done in the right context. How fast will these networks get? Well, the fastest network that I know about is one in Japan, about 160 megabits per second. Now, how fast is that? That's enough to handle all of the television needs, all the reading needs, all the communications needs, obviously all the telephone needs. That's 1/1,000,000th of that amount of bandwidth for an inexpensive price to the homes that they serve. In America, there's a new standard called DOCSIS 3 that's coming out, which is 50 megabits roughly. So all of a sudden, the technology is enabling not only the development of reliable networks, but really a change in the way information is transmitted. And not just, here we're in a newspaper convention, but also movies, television, and so forth, onto this new substrate. And in fact, that's not the end. It's just the beginning of even more. How fast do these things get better? Well, for those of you who don't know, technology is driven by something called Moore's Law, which is roughly a doubling of capacity every 18 months, or a reduction in cost by about a factor of 2 every 18 months. To help you with the math, that means that in 5 years, it's an improvement of basically, if you sort of work it all out, think of it as roughly 10. In 15 years, it's roughly 1,000. So all of a sudden, off you go. So all of a sudden, take all the numbers that I just told you and multiply them by 1,000. 1,000 times more than what I just told you, 1,000 times faster than what I just told you, because we're not done yet. And the evidence in Moore's Law and other technologies is that this is going to continue for at least another 10 or 15 years because of the great work that's going on in the physics labs and so forth and so on. So in that world, there's some non-obvious stuff. For example, IT systems, the ones that all of us built over the last 20 years, are ending up being sort of slow and relatively difficult to configure because they're so complicated. And this new web system that everybody is excited about and building is really the new platform for a lot of things are happening. It also means that these powerful computers can do data mining. So for example, we built something called Flu Trends, which looks at the way people use information and tries to predict the outbreak of a flu. There's a lot of concern about a repeat of a very severe 1918 flu virus that would kill, many, many tens of millions of people. The analysis says that if we were able to get this out a few months earlier, and we think we can do that, that we can save many tens of thousands of lives because of earlier reporting. There are many, many examples where that kind of early, that instantaneous analysis can get us ahead of everybody else. So when you do this, of course, it brings out all sorts of trust issues. What information do you trust? How do you do this? And when I think about newspapers, I think about newspapers as fundamentally standing for something about trust, that their brands represent an ethic and a commitment to accuracy and so forth that has served them for many, many years, which all of you should be very proud of. So what can you do if you follow my reasoning that we're going to have these enormous networks, they're being built now, and we see the effects of them already, with everybody interconnected, what can you do with it? Well, the most obvious one, since we have all the information organized, is we can be sitting here, a politician can be giving you a speech, and we can have the politician BS detector. True? Not true. What probability is what he or she said true? Right? And then you and your staff can go and do the research and try to figure out what the real truth is. We can just sort of listen and figure it out. No problem. For every experience you have, there's a search query that you can do. When I wander around, somebody says something, did you know this or did you know this? I check. And you can usually figure out pretty quickly, within a matter of a few seconds, whether what they said is correct or not. Again, these are today. Imagine 5 years or 10 years from now. We have an application on our Android mobile operating system, and phones are available now, and there are others as well, where you go into the store, you take the UPC barcode, you take a picture of it, and it tells you if it's cheaper online, right? From a consumer perspective, that's a tremendous benefit. I'm not sure that the stores are very happy with it, but the fact of the matter is this is what you can do. If you take a look at another application we have on Android, is you can hold up your phone, look around. It knows where it is because it has a GPS. It takes a picture of all the buildings and it tells you what's going on inside of them. Pretty interesting, to the degree that people will tell us that we know what we want. This notion of user empowerment is a non-obvious but fundamental change brought on by the technological revolutions that I'm talking about. What can you do with the combination of these powerful new mobile devices, a GPS, oh, and by the way, a phone as well. And I forgot, there are more cameras now in phones than there are cameras that are not in phones. There are more movie cameras, soon to be more movie cameras on mobile phones than there are movie cameras in movie cameras. Well, the most obvious one for me is here you are in San Diego, and you walk down the street, and since I like history, the phone tells me the history of every building and every scene I'm in as I'm walking along. Why can't it do that now? Well, indeed it can. Because we know where you are, we know what happened, we've got all that world's information. We've never had these kinds of tools before in our world to use and perhaps to misuse, hopefully not. But it's all there now with a lot of implications for all of us. So if you tell me about the world right now, tell me what's going on right here, right now. I live in a local context. And then later this afternoon, tell me what's going on right now, where I am next, and so forth. So the goal, if you will, is to get 1 billion people to have this kind of power in their hands. So you say, is this madness? Is this achievable? It's easy. There's that many mobile phones being built in the next couple of years with this capability. So this is not some random technology raving. The underlying platform has been built, and indeed the big news this year is that essentially all of the mobile phone operators are now building devices with the kind of capability that I'm describing, with the implication for a lot of us and all the things that we do. Now, what does this mean? It means a lot to how information will be structured and how all of us will have to deal with it. In thinking about newspapers and how they evolve, the first and most interesting idea is to rethink the notion of the story. If we think of newspapers, let's think about the story within the newspaper. The story, of course, has a life. Today, newspapers tend to sort of print them today, and then there's a revision tomorrow, and so forth and so on. But stories have a start, a middle, and an end. And people are fascinated by the beginning and the end. And it's possible now, for example, to algorithmically look and see when the first report was done about something and the last report was done something. But it makes sense to us that stories eventually will evolve. That there'll be a story about Secretary Clinton in Korea, for example, and it has a start and it has a life and it has an end and a resolution. And that notion of resolution is important. A lot of evidence with newspapers is that people feel that when they read the newspaper, when they finish reading the newspaper, they're done. They've achieved their objective. They've learned what they needed to know. We need to come up with the same experience online, and we don't do that very well right now. But nevertheless, the notion of a living story, if you will, a story that has annotation and so forth that you can get into at any depth, is probably one of the new ideas that will affect all of us. One of the other issues that we have with the web is it's still relatively unpleasant, in my view anyway, to read. Think about the joy of reading a magazine. Oh, pretty ad, no, pretty, oh, interesting picture, oh, okay, I like that article, so forth and so on. It's the most wonderful experience because it's the right form factor. You just turn it, it's got pretty pictures and so forth and so on. Why can't we recreate the same thing in the web? Well, today, for example, most of the websites use Flash and other technologies which are pretty but slow. We need to reinvent the way the web delivers this content so that the underlying technology can actually have the kind of experience when people are wandering around with their phones and so forth that you can see with a printed magazine. And of course, I'm going to come to the monetization, which needs to go along with the same thing. But from my perspective, the online experience can be thought of as terrible compared to what I view as this wonderful experience with magazines and newspapers. The sense of newspapers turning it and being done, figuring out, knowing which pages you care about, going to to the second and third page if you like that category versus the fifth page versus the editorial page is a fundamental thing that we don't do very well in my side of the world that we need to get done, and obviously doing it together. On the format, you have the same problem, that the format was one size fits all for good technological reasons, and now we have an opportunity to break through that. And in particular, this format can be very, very different. That people consume information in many, many different ways. And what we've learned in the web is that there is not a one size fits all, that people do things very, very different. We need a new format, if you will, for journalism that will work on all of these new platforms and all of these new formats that I'm talking about. So if you think about all of this, we have an opportunity to redo the way information is processed in our society. In high tech, there's a lot of venture capital. I'll give you an example. I was trying to think about how will the web change in education. I, of course, like I suspect most of you, sat and learned in textbooks and so forth. Well, imagine rather than handing out textbooks in a class, you gave people the equivalent of search queries in Wikipedia pages, and you told them to read them and study them and see what interested them. Would that produce a better educational experience? I don't know. It would certainly produce a different one. Maybe we'll do both. Maybe learning how to use this enormous resource that exists and that is being built over the next 10 or 20 years, the paper of record information, the Wikipedia type information, and the real-time information, which I'll get to in a sec. Maybe learning how to navigate all of that will be just as important as the traditional textbook learning that all of us went through. My friend Bill Joy is a venture capitalist and a very, very smart person. And I asked him what it was like to become a venture capitalist, computer scientist, and he said, well, I don't do it the way other people do it. I said, how do you do it? Well, what I do is I search around a topic, and I learn about it, and I read the papers. And I try to figure out who are the people who write the most interesting papers, who write the most of them. I eventually make the list, and I call them. And since no one ever calls them, they call me back. Interesting. Very interesting way to become a venture capitalist. Normally they sit, they wait for people to make proposals. He calls the people, and he says, well, would this work? Would this idea work? And so forth and so on. And what it triggered in my mind is that there's a very, very different relationship to information if you take an aggressive position, if you will, a reportorial position, as opposed to a consuming position. If you engage in it and you learn about it and so forth, it's a different outcome. And that opportunity is before all of us with our readers, your readers, our readers, and so forth as we make this thing happen. The reality, now we measure this pretty carefully, the reality is that the vast majority of information is not being produced by any of the traditional mechanisms for making information. It's being produced user to user. And sometimes, free speech gets a little pushed when you start looking at what they produce. And you wonder about taste and judgment and so forth. But the fact of the matter is this is the new world. That a truly fundamental change in the way information is being processed is that we have given the tools of publication to people who maybe they need a better education, let's put it that way. But the important thing is that information is not going to go away. If anything, the growth rates on an aggregate and percentage basis are much, much higher. So all of us now live in this world of a mixture of professionally produced content and, if you will, user-generated content. So how could you use that to advantage? The most obvious example to me would be, think about, let's build up a product. Let's call it WikiMed. Doctors spend all their time with all this specialized information that they have. Why is there not the equivalent of Wikipedia for medicine, where all of the sort of canonical and judgment things that doctors know in their heads, along with shared summaries of outcomes and tests and so forth? Why is there not a single repository for that? Well, there are many reasons for that, but it's obvious that there will be one. So the same thing for every other trade, for every other specialization. maybe even for reporters as to how to be a great reporter. My point is that the notion of this sort of community-generated information is already in aggregate more than professionally produced information and is likely to become more important. So when we build products, when you think about how your users consume things, you'll discover that it's really in both places. So search then becomes fundamentally more personal. It's all about what I want, because I'm the one asking the search, I'm asking the search query. And so in this model that I'm talking about, why doesn't the newspaper know what I read yesterday? Makes sense to me. When I turn on the television, it shows me the same show it showed me yesterday. Clearly a bug in the television. Why does it not already know that I watched that show? This is easy. It's easy to remember this kind of stuff. So the new model of consuming news, since it's personal, whether it's search or other-based, will be knowing that you've already read this. It'll show you the delta. It'll understand a little bit more about what you care about. I don't like sports and I do like international, or I don't like international and I only read sports. And I only care about these teams or these sports, and occasionally I want this other thing. If you remember what I looked for yesterday, you can tell me what has changed. You can also tell me, again, with permission, what my friends are focused on. And the new model of social networks means that people can take their networks of friends, all the way in which that they interact, and they can actually operate as a community around information. This phenomena, pioneered by Facebook and a number of others, looks to us as another fundamental change in the way people will consume information, as people care a lot about what their friends are doing. And so combining all of those two allows us to build a product which I'm just going to call Entertain Me. What I want, and we've not yet built, but I hope we can do someday, is I want a constant stream of entertainment that's consistent with the principles that I'm describing. And entertainment here, I mean very broadly. I mean news and information and gossip and television and radio and so forth and so on, because the computer can know what I care about. Now, when you do all of this, it's very important to know the first and most important law of all this technology, which is you need to know where the off button is, right? Because you can get overloaded. So in that sense, the most obvious question, the question on everybody's minds here, is how do we make money doing this? This is what users want. And one of the fundamental problems with the internet is it doesn't respect traditional scarcity structures. And all of us are struggling with that in various ways. The fact of the matter is it's very difficult to hold information back. So we think the answer is advertising. Now, since 98% of our revenue comes from advertising, I guess we have a bias. But we think it comes from advertising because advertising still is the best way to reach a very, very large audience. And I think if you think of it in that hierarchy, not only do you have local audiences, but you now have national and global audiences for advertisers. The kinds of products that can be built here in advertising and that we're beginning to build are equivalently exciting. What's advertising about? It's about engagement. It's about telling a story. What do marketers care about? They care about telling a story. They tell it in a picture or a word or a phrase. Well, in this new world, they can tell it with time and engagement. You click on an ad and all of a sudden, it's a narrative. Why don't we have ads that have narratives and pictures and so forth? Why don't we have ads that are the equivalent of multi-user games, where the other people who are also participating in the ads are also interacting with each other in real time? You want to talk about time that a customer spends inside of an ad? That's a way to do it. Take the ideas of networks and gaming and so forth and apply them. All of that technology becomes possible over the next few years. Those ads, in our view, replace the traditional advertising models that all of us grew up with because they're just so much more compelling. Now, they don't replace them all at once, and it takes a very long time. But the fact of the matter is that advertising works when it adds value to the customer, when it tells them something they don't know, when it gets them educated or excited or passionate. And the advertising industry is very, very good at doing this. We recently brought out a set of products called instrument-based advertising that allow us to tailor to people's interests and so forth. And importantly, people can opt out if they don't like the way we've constructed their tastes and so forth. They'll just turn the whole thing off precisely. The important thing here is that advertising that's useful is going to work. We know it works because we can measure it. So an example would be, if you have an ad for an espresso machine, typical example, today we would show you a text ad, which is fine, but wouldn't it be better if it had pictures, prices, how to buy it, and all that kind of stuff? So if we take the premise that we have an advertising model that's going to work, and we have this explosion in mobile content with all of the sort of people working and so forth and so on that I've been talking about, and all of that changes, what does it mean for how people will use it? Well, to me, the most interesting example is the Kindle, which is, I think, very successful. And what I like about the Kindle is it's another example of cloud computing for specialists, for people who care a lot about newspapers and books and so forth. It's a model that works. It works economically, because it's a subscription-based model. It works technologically. And imagine as that platform evolves how much more powerful it is. It's the first of, I think, many that are going to come in this new model. So what happens to this if you take the world of radio and television broadcast, internet, cable, broadcast, newspaper, everything sort of being online, these huge pipes that come out of the internet with all of this content and everybody seeking everybody's attention? Well, a lot of new things happen. You can imagine live concerts, right, where the live concerts take the videos that are coming out of people's cell phones and stream them on stage right there in the local context. You want to talk about something exciting, get the fans involved directly in the performance. When you think about movie theaters, here we are, we're all in the same movie theater, we're all watching the same movie, and we're all tweeting or twittering to each other, oh, I think she's wrong, or oh, I don't think that's the right thing, or oh, he didn't kill her, or what have you. This is going to happen because of this notion of being in a shared community, derives information so powerfully. Here we are, and we're all sitting here listening to me. Why don't we have mood mapping? Everybody sort of tweets, well, I don't like it, or I do like it, or so forth. We can do it real time. This is the year when real time gets added to the equation that we are all dealing with now that I've been talking about so far. So all of a sudden, in addition to professional content, the building of the web, all of the user-generated content, it's now all becoming real time. It is that sum that defines both the problem and the opportunity that all of us see. I've been thinking about how does this play out globally. One of the great things that's happened in the last few years is the ability to do simultaneous translation of everything. I think 100 languages translated into 100 other languages. It will be possible relatively soon for you to instant message somebody who does not speak your language, because we'll be able to translate it enough contextually to have you be able to have a conversation. I think that's pretty neat. The same thing for these social communities. And language has often been a barrier not just to misunderstanding, but eventually to conflict and war and really horrific things. From my perspective, the opportunity, for example, to use these very, very large number of mobile phones that are out, not the high-speed ones that are all coming out now, but the ones that came out last year and the year before, especially those that are in the third world, for things like SMS, where you can do search queries, find out about the weather, find out about the news, find out about your local context, is another platform and another opportunity for news, newspapers, and information. And it's one where real-time, life-critical information can be transmitted for people who will never have, at least are unlikely to have, access to a television or a personal computer or the kinds of networks that I'm talking about. So my point here is that when you add all of this up, and I'll finish up to put it into context, you have the fundamental principle, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the enormous impact that newspapers have had in governance, in creating a civil society, in creating a great country. The sum of all of that has delivered us to this point, economically, politically, and so forth, where it's now an opportunity for us to understand how innovation really occurs and what will really get us going again. From our perspective, the innovation opportunities are around the cloud computing platform, all of the technologies that I talked about, and the fact that end users, your readers, our consumers, our searchers, and so forth, have these infinitely larger choices around both professionally produced content and user-generated content and real-time content. They will decide how successful we are. based on the quality of the information that we produce, the number of voices, and so forth. From our perspective, we need those voices. Google is not a content company. We're not reporters. We don't understand this stuff particularly well. What we do is build platforms that can enable the broad use and distribution of many, many different forms of content and information, and understand and using clever computer tricks, basically assemble all of this information into one place. Why has this been so hard? Why is everybody so worried? Well, it's a very hard transition. These are models that are changing. Consumers are changing even more quickly than I had ever thought. It will be, in all of these industries, 5 or 10 years of very difficult business restructuring, business questions, as everybody tries to understand how to move to this new model. The fundamental issue, and I'll say it again, is that the internet distribution model doesn't work on scarcity, that it works on ubiquity. And that what we have to do is find models that involve very broad distribution and that you make money all along the way. We, of course, are in the advertising business, and we think that money will be there. We think that there's a way to do it with even more targeting and even more immersive kinds of advertising models. And we think that that is the ultimate outcome for how all this will play out. In 1831, de Tocqueville toured America, and I'm paraphrasing, and said that America will do well because of its sunny optimism, its abundance of land, and its absence of a king. When I think today, I think the same thing is still true. The political dynamic, the enormous resources that we have, the ingenuity of our people, the sum of all of that, I think creates a next set of opportunities for us to seize, for us to take, for us to build businesses on top of. From my perspective, we have to embrace what users want together. And by doing that, I think we can win big. So with that, thank you very much. So Gary, I think you indicated we had time for questions. So we have some mics, or people can shout out, I can repeat it. I'm happy to answer any questions on any subject. And I guess we should say it's on the record, since we're in newspaper land.
You had mentioned the importance of advertising as a future, but in your opening remarks, you also indicated a bit about micropayments and subscriptions. Would you elaborate on each of those other two potentials?
I think you're going to end up with all three. An analogy I would offer is television. There's free television, over-the-air television, there's cable television, and there's pay television. And they have smaller markets as you go from free to more highly paid. And that structure looks to us like roughly the structure of all of these businesses. Today, there are very effective subscription-based models, but they're not very good micropayment systems. Micropayment meaning 1 cent, 3 cent kinds of systems. They clearly need to be developed by the industry. So I think from your perspective, you should assume that your information, that there's a category of information you all produce that you'll want to distribute freely. There's a category that you'll want to have a per-click basis, and then there's some that you'll want subscription for. The reality is that in this new model, the vast majority of people will only deal with the free model, and so you'll be forced, whether we like it or not, to have a significant advertising component as well as a micropayment and a traditional payment system. The technology around micropayments is getting to be possible now. The transaction cost was so high before that you couldn't do the 1 cent, 3 cent kind of a model. But it looks like the new technologies around aggregation will allow that at the payment level.
If I could follow up,
Sure.
You made a comment regarding trust, and somewhat of a practical question. You've been quoted as saying a number of times that there's going to be a flight to quality, that there's just an awful lot of garbage out on the internet.
Let me just say precisely, sure. It's a sewer out there.
Okay, okay, fair, very fair. Question, though, is recognizing that the brands in this room, for the most part,
Sure.
are credible brands, and following up on your...
I would say 100% are credible.
Trust, yes. On your trust comment, is there a way to look at search, and when you search on a particular topic, that news organizations with credible brands, somehow the algorithm is tweaked or adjusted to reflect that, not only for the benefit of the publishers, but for the benefit of the users?
We actually do that in the case of Google News. Google News uses a relatively fixed set of sources which are selected based on exactly the kind of trust that you're describing. So the answer to your question is yes on Google News. For general search, we've been careful not to bias it using our own judgment of trust, because we're never sure if we get it right. So we use complicated ranking signals, that are, as they're called, to determine ranking relevance. And we change them periodically, which drives everybody crazy as our algorithms get better. There's no question in my experience that the top brands represented here in this room would, in fact, float to the top in our search ranking. The usual problem is you've got somebody who really is very trustworthy, but they're not as well known. And they compete against people who are better known, and they don't, in their view, get high enough ranking. We've not come up with a way to algorithmically handle that in a coherent way. But we're very sensitive to not, on the search, on literally the generic search answers, we don't want to go in and do the kind of thing you're describing unless we can do it across the board and for all categories of trusted institutions, not just newspapers. And that's where we get in trouble. More questions? Yes? Okay.
Two-part question. First of all, thank you for coming to speak to us today. Part one, speak frankly, if you would, about how you feel newspapers have performed digitally, over the past 10 or 15 years. And then part two, let's assume that one of your greatest fantasies in life came true and you became the CEO of an American newspaper company. And what would be the top 2 or 3 or 4 things that you would do as the CEO of a newspaper company in the digital space? What would you make sure that this newspaper company did immediately in the digital space?
So the first question was?
Speak frankly about our performance. How do you feel American newspapers have done?
I can sort of answer both questions at the same time. I was very impressed by how quickly all the newspapers that I talked with in the mid to late 90s embraced the web. And essentially all of them quickly understood, first, the repurposing of existing print stories onto the web, and then the creation of reporters' blogs. The criticism, if I can offer one, is that there wasn't an act after that. There wasn't a thing after. In other words, that's great. You guys did a superb job. And the act after that is a much harder question, which is how do you keep engagement? How do you avoid being disintermediated, if you will, into just a set of stories that are aggregated with your brand on them, which is what has happened to some newspapers. So in the case of just that you were describing, if I were involved with the digital part of a newspaper, trying to understand what to do, I would first and foremost try to understand what my reader wants. It's obvious to me that the majority of the circulation in a newspaper should be online rather than printed. There should be 5 times, 10 times more circulation because there's no distribution cost. It doesn't cost anything to read it online from the end user perspective. So I would start with my diagnosis is, how do we get to 10 times more readers online? What do they want to see? What is their style? My own bias, by the way, is a technology one. I think the sites are slow. I mean, they literally are not fast. When I read the paper, they're actually slower than reading the paper, and that's something that can be worked on in a technical basis. I should also mention that at Google, we're working hard to try to address the technological question that you're asking, but we don't have easy answers here. This is something where better development tools, better hosting tools, and so forth from the industry as a whole will make a big difference for newspaper publishers. More questions? Yes.
Mr. Schmidt, the Associated Press resolved over the last few days to take a more aggressive approach to enforcement of intellectual property rights. Speaking from your perspective at Google, what impact, if any, do you think that would have on the relationship between Google and the Associated Press and the members it represents? And secondly, looking ahead on intellectual property generally, how effective do you think that more aggressive approach might prove to be?
With respect to the Associated Press, we at Google have a multi-million-dollar deal with the Associated Press, not only to distribute their content, but also to host it at our servers. So I was a little confused by all of the excitement in the news in the last 24 hours. I'm not quite sure what they were referring to. But we have a very, very successful deal with AP, and hopefully that will continue for many, many years. Your second question?
If you would look ahead a little bit on the outlook of the future of intellectual property rights as affected by the growth of digital publishing.
The ultimate resolution of all of these, and we have lawyers in the room, is ultimately determined by how you interpret fair use. And in my position, I've come to learn that lawyers go to different schools. And if you went to school A, you learned it one way, and if you went to school B, you learned it another way. And if you're Google, all your lawyers went to school B, and if you're the other side, all your lawyers went to school A. And I am not a lawyer, so I will simply report what the school B lawyers say. And then if you're a lawyer and you went to school A or B, you can just tell me so I can figure out how to talk to you. From our perspective, we've looked at this pretty thoroughly, and there is always a tension around fair use. But ultimately, fair use is a balance of interest in favor of the consumer. And that I would encourage everybody when they think about, and all the rhetoric and all the concern about this or that, think in terms of what your reader wants. Try to figure out how to solve their problem. These are ultimately consumer businesses, and if you piss off enough of them, you will not have any more, right? Or if you make them happy, you will grow them quickly. And so we try really hard to think that way, and these are often uncomfortable at Google as well as at other companies. You could have to ask a more specific question. I could respond more specifically.
Well, do you think that the intellectual property rights will continue to erode given the digital future as you see it?
There are laws that cover these things. So it's important that all of us respect the law. And it is a balance of interest between the copyright holder, and we try very much to respect the copyright holder. There are all sorts of examples where Google is the company in the middle of one of these sort of disputes that people really never resolved. We came to what looks like a very good settlement with respect to, for example, books. So I disagree with your premise that they will continue to erode. What I do believe is that all of these partially thought through legal systems are being challenged by the ubiquity of the internet, just as free speech is being affected by the fact that people are now free to speak whatever they think, even if we really don't want to hear them. It's the same problem. I would tell you, by the way, that these issues we've faced these issues for many, many years in our society, generations before us, and we resolved them in a way that caused the right thing to occur, that businesses were built, entrepreneurs were able to create new businesses, and consumers were ultimately being met. So I disagree with you that it's obvious that there's an erosion of future intellectual property rights. There is a problem, if by that you mean people stealing, there is a problem where countries outside of America do not have the same kind of laws, and it's really an issue. So if that's what you're referring to, then yes, it is an issue. Yeah.
Mr. Schmidt, yeah. Thank you again for coming today.
Sure.
To take that same discussion and take the fair use defense and take that out of the equation and just look at it from a very practical standpoint, Google has been at the forefront of conditioning our audiences that a headline and extract is enough. So they've gotten to the point now where we do a Google search and we come up with a list of topics or from Google News, and we look at the headline and the extract, and that becomes enough news in the Twitter world. So that what happens is that now Google becomes the point in the middle between that audience, that consumer, supporting the creation of that professional content you were talking about.
Okay.
So the real question becomes, how can the media industry in general partner with Google to help support that professional content when the consumer is, you know, the headline and extract is good enough?
Again, I want to be careful not to criticize consumers for doing things that are idiotic. You know, you can have your opinion, but my position here is we love our consumers even if I don't like what they're doing. And in Google News' case, for example, when we first built Google News, I remember being absolutely terrified the first meeting of this category I was in. And then one of the editors came up and said, "This is a great product." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it provides me a summary every day from which I can then do quality work." I said, "Okay, well, that's a good answer." And everybody here understands that everyone here has an opportunity to opt out of all of this by using robots.txt and other. These are one-line changes that can take all of the information out of Google. And again, it's your content, we respect that, and so forth. So given that it's a problem that we all share, that consumers want to do this thing, I would first observe that Google News is not very much different from the news that I get on the radio. That basically, when I listen to the radio, I hear roughly the same headlines that I see on Google News. So I'm not sure that it's a new form. I think it's a transmitted form. My general answer to this question has to do with getting people to take the next step. If you see a headline, what I want you to do is I want you to think, oh, that's interesting, I want to know more. And then based on that, I want you to click to the newspaper website or to Wikipedia or to wherever. If we can build products, and we have teams at Google working on this, which roughly work like that, where there's a one-liner that's interesting, and you click there and you go into layer after layer after layer of information. And by the way, not just text, but also video, entertainment, and so forth and so on. That's personalized. We think that we can build a business, again, with you guys, with significant advertising resources where the advertising is targeted to the content. To me, that's the only solution we've come up with to this problem. I don't think we're fundamentally going to decrease the fascination that the world has with Britney Spears. I think it's just fundamentally going to continue. And Gary says I have time for one more question, so.
If one of the issues that still is a problem for us is 14 or 15 years into the internet for us, there are no defined standards of what exactly an eyeball is. There are 4 or 5 different providers. If you look at your internal data versus an external source, you will go absolutely crazy. How do you all look at what is truth to you when it comes to either external or internal sources of audience counting that make the most sense to develop into a standard over time?
We look at clicks, and we also look at how long people stay on a page, and we can then infer interest. Your question is so good because it shows you how early we are in the industry. We don't have combined, accurate, audited ways of measuring audiences, counting, advertisers, and so on, all of which has to be developed as a technology behind the businesses that all of us are going to build. It took many, many years for the same business structures to be, for example, designed for the audit circulation bureaus for magazines. The same thing is going to occur, and it will occur because it needs to be. From our perspective, we use our internal information, which is accurate, but as I agree, there's not a uniform standard for it, and that will be developed. With that, Gary says I'm done, so thank you very, very much. I hope you guys enjoyed it.